The story of the Germanic tribes is a tale of migration, resilience, conquest, and transformation, stretching across centuries of ancient and medieval Europe. They were not one people but many, a collection of diverse tribes bound together by shared language roots, warrior traditions, and a fierce determination to survive in a continent in flux. To understand Europe's foundations, one must journey back to the dense forests, wide rivers, and shifting frontiers where these tribes thrived, fought, and eventually helped shape the very identity of the continent. Their story is not just of battles and bloodshed but also of cultural endurance, adaptation, and an undeniable influence that still echoes through modern Europe. Long before Rome rose to dominate the Mediterranean world, the lands north of the Alps and east of the Rhine were home to loosely organized tribal societies. These Germanic peoples were pastoral, living in scattered villages, herding animals, hunting in the woods, and farming the soil. Their communities were led by chieftains who commanded both respect and loyalty, not only because of bloodline but also because of personal valor and the ability to lead warriors in battle. Unlike the centralized states of Rome, these tribes valued freedom and autonomy. Decisions were often made in communal assemblies where free men could voice their opinions, a tradition that hinted at early democratic principles but was always tempered by the authority of strong war leaders. When the Roman legions marched into Gaul, Britain, and across the Danube, they inevitably came into contact with the Germanic tribes. To the Romans, these northern peoples were both a threat and a mystery. Writers like Tacitus described them as fierce, tall, and hardy, living simple but virtuous lives compared to what Rome saw as the decadence of urban civilization. Tacitus' work Germania painted a picture of tribes deeply attached to their independence, bound by kinship and warrior loyalty, and prepared to fight to the death to preserve their lands. Though biased and often romanticized, his account remains one of the earliest detailed glimpses into the Germanic world. The clash between Rome and the Germanic tribes would define centuries of European history. Perhaps the most legendary moment came in the year 9 AD, when the Roman general Varus led 3 legions deep into the forests of Germania. There, a chieftain named Arminius, once a trusted Roman ally, led a coalition of tribes into a devastating ambush. In the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, the Romans were annihilated. Entire legions were wiped out, their eagles captured, their soldiers slaughtered or enslaved. This crushing defeat stopped Roman expansion into Germania and cemented the region as a land beyond imperial control. Arminius became a symbol of Germanic resistance, and centuries later, during times of rising nationalism, he was remembered as the father of German unity. Though Rome maintained the upper hand militarily in many encounters, it was never able to fully conquer the Germanic world. Instead, Rome learned to coexist, fortifying borders along the Rhine and Danube, trading goods and ideas, and even recruiting Germanic warriors as auxiliaries and mercenaries in its armies. Over time, thousands of Germanic soldiers became part of Rome's defense, gaining valuable experience in Roman tactics and organization. This integration, however, came with long-term consequences, for when Rome's power began to falter, it was these same warriors who would turn their strength against the empire. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the Roman world was under immense pressure. Internal strife, economic decline, and constant threats from outside invaders weakened its stability. The Germanic tribes, meanwhile, were also being pushed westward by the arrival of new powers such as the Huns from the steppes of Central Asia. Entire peoples were forced to migrate, abandoning ancestral homelands to seek safety and opportunity within the Roman frontier. This great migration set the stage for the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of the Germanic kingdoms that would replace it. The Visigoths, under their leader Alaric, are among the most famous of these migrating tribes. Once allies of Rome, they grew discontent with broken promises, poor treatment, and lack of supplies. In 410 AD, Alaric led his warriors into Italy and shocked the world by sacking Rome itself. For the first time in nearly 8 centuries, the Eternal City fell to foreign invaders. Though Alaric's Visigoths soon moved on to establish their kingdom in Spain, the psychological impact of Rome's sack was immense. It marked the beginning of the end for the Western Empire and signaled the ascendancy of the Germanic tribes. Other tribes soon carved out realms of their own. The Vandals, another Germanic people, crossed into North Africa and built a powerful maritime kingdom, even daring to sack Rome again in 455. The Ostrogoths, under the legendary Theodoric the Great, established a strong realm in Italy, blending Roman traditions with Germanic customs. The Lombards would follow, taking control of much of Italy in later centuries. In Gaul, the Franks emerged as a dominant force, eventually uniting under leaders such as Clovis, who converted to Christianity and laid the foundation for what would become modern France. Among these rising powers, none would be more influential than the Franks. Their kingdom grew steadily, and under the Carolingian dynasty, especially Charlemagne, the Franks expanded to control vast territories across Western and Central Europe. Charlemagne was crowned emperor in 800 AD, reviving the idea of a Western Roman Empire but under Germanic leadership and Christian faith. This fusion of Roman heritage, Christian religion, and Germanic warrior culture became the foundation of medieval Europe. The Germanic legacy extended far beyond military conquest. Their traditions of law, governance, and social organization influenced emerging European societies. Tribal assemblies, where free men debated and decided key matters, evolved into early forms of parliaments and councils. Their warrior codes of loyalty, honor, and kinship became embedded in the ethos of medieval knighthood and feudal obligation. Even the languages of Europe bear their mark, as the Germanic tongues gave rise to modern German, English, Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages, while also leaving traces in French and other Romance languages through centuries of interaction. Religion was another transformative force. The early Germanic tribes practiced polytheism, worshipping gods such as Woden, Odin, Donner, Thor, and Tiwaz, Tyr. Their myths, later recorded in Norse sagas, tell of a world shaped by struggle, heroism, and inevitable fate, culminating in the apocalyptic battle of Ragnarok. These beliefs reinforced their warrior culture, celebrating bravery in the face of death and loyalty to kin and tribe. Over time, however, Christianity spread among the tribes, first through Roman missionaries and later through the influence of converted kings like Clovis. The adoption of Christianity was not immediate or uniform, but once embraced, it bound the tribes to the wider Christian world of Europe and helped forge a new shared identity. Yet, the Germanic tribes were never static. They adapted to their environments, absorbed influences from Rome, Byzantium, and later from Islam through Mediterranean contacts. They built kingdoms that blended old traditions with new institutions, creating hybrid cultures that were distinctly European. The Visigothic kingdom in Spain developed legal codes that integrated Roman law with Germanic customs. The Ostrogoths in Italy preserved much of the Roman administrative system while maintaining their own warrior elite. The Anglo-Saxons in Britain, descendants of Germanic settlers, built kingdoms that would eventually unite into England, carrying with them a language and culture that would dominate the world centuries later. Even in decline, the memory of the Germanic tribes continued to shape identity. In the Middle Ages, rulers traced their legitimacy to tribal ancestors. The Holy Roman Empire, which dominated Central Europe for centuries, saw itself as a continuation of both Rome and the Germanic tradition. In the modern era, nationalist movements of the 19th century rediscovered the Germanic past, celebrating figures like Arminius and reviving sagas that spoke of a heroic age of freedom and resistance. Though often romanticized or distorted, these memories reveal how deeply the Germanic heritage was woven into the fabric of Europe. The impact of the Germanic tribes cannot be reduced to mere destruction of Rome or barbarian invasions. They were builders as much as they were warriors, founders of kingdoms, preservers of traditions, and transmitters of culture. Without them, the Europe that emerged from the ruins of Rome would have been unrecognizable. Their blend of independence, warrior ethos, and adaptability created the conditions for the medieval world and eventually the nations we know today. The story of these tribes is also the story of transformation. What began as small, scattered groups living in the forests and plains of northern Europe grew into powers that shaped the destiny of a continent. They resisted conquest, endured migration, and overcame adversity. They forged new identities while preserving their roots, leaving behind legacies that endure in law, language, culture, and memory. Their saga is not merely a tale of the past but a foundation of the European experience itself. To journey into the lives of the Germanic tribes is to walk among fierce warriors who valued freedom above all else, who could strike fear into Rome yet also build kingdoms that nurtured faith, law, and learning. Their spirit, both wild and enduring, is etched into Europe's history as a reminder of how resilience, courage, and adaptability can shape the destiny of nations. From the Teutoburg forest to the courts of Charlemagne, from the myths of Odin to the churches of Clovis, their path was one of struggle and creation. And in that path, they forged Europe itself. Origins of the Germanic tribes in northern and central Europe. The Germanic tribes trace their origins to the cold, forested, and river-filled landscapes of northern and central Europe. Archaeological evidence points to their presence as early as the Bronze Age, with distinctive cultures developing around the Jastorf and Nordic regions. These communities were not unified nations but rather loose tribal groups, bound together by kinship, shared language roots, and common customs. Life was shaped by the harsh environment, which demanded resilience and adaptability. Farming, animal husbandry, and seasonal hunting provided sustenance, while small settlements dotted the countryside. Unlike the highly urbanized societies of the Mediterranean, the Germanic peoples lived in simpler, rural communities with strong ties to nature and the cycles of the land. Their society was warrior-based, valuing courage and physical strength as much as loyalty to family and tribe. Oral traditions and heroic tales preserved their identity across generations, while craftsmanship in weapons, jewelry, and household goods reflected a culture both practical and artistic. By the time Rome expanded northward, these tribes were already established as a formidable presence, distinct from Celts and other neighboring peoples. Their geographical isolation initially kept them away from larger civilizations, but as centuries passed, this isolation would end, bringing them face to face with the might of Rome. Early lifestyle, culture, and warrior traditions. Daily life among the Germanic tribes revolved around survival, community, and the honor of warfare. Most tribes lived in small wooden or thatched dwellings clustered into villages surrounded by farmland. Men tended to livestock, hunted, and trained for battle, while women managed households, worked fields, and upheld traditions. Their society was patriarchal but respected women's roles in preserving heritage and forging alliances through marriage. At the heart of their culture was the warrior ethos. Fighting was not only a necessity but a sacred duty. Courage in battle was celebrated, and cowardice was despised. Wealth was measured less in coins and more in cattle, land, and the loyalty of warriors. Chieftains gained authority through bravery and generosity, rewarding followers with gifts and feasts in return for loyalty in war. Religion reflected their martial spirit, with gods like Odin, Thor, and Tyr embodying wisdom, thunder, and valor. Rituals, sacrifices, and sacred groves connected them to divine forces believed to influence battle outcomes and natural cycles. Poetry and song immortalized heroes and tribal legends, reinforcing values of honor and loyalty. This combination of harsh living conditions and warrior tradition created a people hardened by struggle, ready to fight for survival against neighboring tribes and eventually against Rome itself. Roman encounters with Germanic tribes and first impressions. When Roman explorers, traders, and soldiers first encountered the Germanic tribes across the Rhine and Danube, they saw a people both alien and threatening. Roman writers such as Julius Caesar, who fought campaigns in Gaul, described them as tall, physically imposing, and accustomed to hardship. To the Romans, they appeared savage yet noble, lacking the refinements of urban life but embodying virtues of bravery and simplicity. Tacitus, in his famous work Germania, wrote admiringly of their independence and family loyalty, contrasting them with what he perceived as Rome's own corruption. At the same time, Roman officials viewed them as dangerous neighbors who threatened the empire's northern frontiers. Roman armies launched punitive expeditions, building forts and watchtowers along the borders to monitor and repel tribal incursions. Yet, these encounters were not only hostile. Trade flourished across the frontiers, with Germanic tribes exchanging furs, amber, and slaves for Roman wine, glassware, and weapons. Many young Germanic warriors enlisted as auxiliaries in Roman legions, gaining wealth and military knowledge. Rome's first impressions, therefore, were mixed: fascination, fear, and pragmatism combined. The tribes were recognized as both valuable allies and dangerous enemies, setting the stage for centuries of conflict, negotiation, and cultural exchange between the empire and the northern peoples. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest and Arminius' victory over Rome. One of the most defining moments in Roman-Germanic relations came in the year 9 AD, deep within the dense Teutoburg Forest. Publius Quinctilius Varus, a Roman governor, marched with 3 legions into what he thought was a routine operation. Unbeknownst to him, a Germanic chieftain named Arminius, once trained and trusted by the Romans, had orchestrated a grand trap. Arminius united various tribes who put aside rivalries to resist Rome. Using the forest's terrain to their advantage, the tribes ambushed the Roman columns, bogging them down in mud and narrow paths. For days, the legions were harassed, slaughtered, and surrounded. In the end, nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed, their standards captured, and Varus took his own life. This catastrophe shocked Rome to its core. Emperor Augustus reportedly wandered his palace crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." The defeat shattered Rome's ambitions of permanent conquest east of the Rhine. Arminius' triumph became a symbol of Germanic defiance and unity, though the tribes soon returned to their fractious ways. Nevertheless, the battle ensured Germania remained unconquered, preserving the independence of the tribes. Centuries later, German nationalists would hail Arminius as a founding hero, proof of the Germanic will to resist imperial domination. Roman-Germanic interactions, trade, alliances, and mercenary service. Despite bloody conflicts, Rome and the Germanic tribes engaged in a complex relationship of interaction, compromise, and mutual dependence. Along the Limes, the fortified Roman frontiers, merchants and traders met with tribal groups to exchange goods. Roman wine, olive oil, and fine weapons were highly prized by Germanic elites, while Rome imported amber, furs, livestock, and slaves from beyond the frontier. Diplomatic alliances were forged, often sealed by hostages or intermarriage between Roman and Germanic nobles. Tribes were sometimes recruited as foederati, or allied forces, pledged to defend Roman borders in exchange for subsidies and land. Germanic warriors also enlisted directly into Roman legions, gaining invaluable training in military discipline, siege tactics, and the use of Roman equipment. This experience gave many tribesmen the skills to later challenge Rome with devastating effectiveness. Roman culture also seeped into tribal life, introducing new technologies, agricultural practices, and even religious ideas. Yet, mistrust lingered. Rome always feared betrayal, while the tribes resented their subordinate status. This uneasy coexistence meant that peace was fragile, often collapsing into raids and wars. Still, the centuries-long interactions left an enduring imprint on both sides, blending cultures and ensuring that when Rome finally fell, the Germanic tribes were already deeply woven into its fabric. The Great Migration period and pressures from the Huns. By the 4th century, the stability of Europe was shaken by what historians call the Migration period, or the Völkerwanderung. Germanic tribes, once relatively stable in their homelands, were forced to move due to a chain reaction triggered by the arrival of the Huns. These fierce nomadic horsemen swept in from the steppes of Central Asia, driving other groups before them. The Goths, both Visigoths and Ostrogoths, were among the first to feel the pressure, fleeing southward toward the Roman frontiers. Desperation forced them to seek asylum within the empire, which reluctantly allowed them to settle but failed to provide adequate support. Tensions exploded at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where the Visigoths defeated and killed the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens, a staggering blow to Roman power. This migration set off a domino effect. Vandals, Suebi, Burgundians, and others poured into Roman territories, seeking land and resources. The Western Empire struggled to contain these waves, often making treaties that temporarily calmed tensions but ultimately gave tribes the foothold they needed to establish permanent kingdoms. The pressure of the Huns, who continued to raid deep into Europe under leaders like Attila, forced the Germanic tribes to adapt or perish. Their migrations not only reshaped borders but fundamentally altered the cultural and political map of Europe. The Visigoths and the sack of Rome under Alaric in 410 AD. Perhaps no single event symbolized Rome's vulnerability more than the sack of its eternal city in 410 AD. The Visigoths, led by their determined king Alaric, had once been allies of Rome, serving as foederati in exchange for land and supplies. But mistreatment, broken promises, and lack of food pushed them to rebellion. After years of negotiations, battles, and failed settlements, Alaric marched on Italy itself. The gates of Rome, long thought impregnable, were eventually opened after a siege. For 3 days, the Visigoths plundered the city, though with a restraint that shocked observers. They spared churches and did not slaughter indiscriminately. Still, the psychological impact was enormous. Rome had not been captured in 800 years, and its fall to a foreign tribe shattered the illusion of invincibility. Alaric's sack was not merely about loot but about demanding recognition and a secure homeland for his people. Though he died shortly after, the Visigoths eventually settled in Gaul and then Spain, founding a kingdom that lasted for centuries. Their legal codes, blending Roman and Germanic traditions, influenced European law long after their kingdom fell to later conquerors. The sack of Rome marked the twilight of the Western Empire and the dawn of Germanic ascendancy. The Vandals rise in their North African kingdom. Among the Germanic tribes, the Vandals achieved one of the most surprising feats by carving out a maritime empire in North Africa. Originally from Central Europe, they joined the Great Migrations, moving through Gaul and Spain before crossing into Africa in 429 AD under their king Genseric. Once in North Africa, they captured Carthage in 439, transforming it into their capital. With Carthage under their control, the Vandals became a dominant naval power, controlling Mediterranean trade routes and launching raids across the sea. Their boldest strike came in 455 AD, when they sailed to Italy and sacked Rome itself. Unlike the Visigoths' earlier sack, the Vandals looted thoroughly, taking treasures and captives back to Carthage. This gave rise to the word vandalism, though in truth, their actions reflected the norms of conquest at the time. The Vandals maintained their kingdom for nearly a century, a remarkable achievement considering their small numbers compared to surrounding populations. They balanced Roman administrative practices with their own traditions, but their rule was often strained by tensions with the local Roman population and the Byzantine Empire. Eventually, in 534, the Byzantines under General Belisarius destroyed the Vandal kingdom. Still, their brief dominance left a striking example of how Germanic tribes could build powerful states from the ruins of Rome. The Ostrogoths under Theodoric the Great in Italy. The Ostrogoths, kin to the Visigoths, created a remarkable kingdom in Italy under the leadership of Theodoric the Great. Born a hostage in Constantinople, Theodoric was educated in Roman ways, learning diplomacy and military skills that would serve him well. In 489 AD, he led his people into Italy at the request of the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno, who hoped to rid himself of the troublesome warlord Odoacer. Theodoric defeated Odoacer and established himself as ruler of Italy, but rather than destroy Roman traditions, he sought to preserve them. His reign was marked by an unusual balance between Gothic and Roman cultures. He maintained Roman administration, respected the Senate, and encouraged harmony between Goths and Romans. Theodoric also sponsored building projects, including the restoration of aqueducts and monuments in Rome and Ravenna. His kingdom became a model of coexistence, though tensions between the Gothic warrior elite and the Roman populace simmered beneath the surface. Theodoric's rule demonstrated that Germanic kings could not only conquer but also govern effectively, drawing upon Roman legacies while maintaining tribal identity. After his death in 526, his kingdom quickly unraveled, but his reign stood as a high point of Gothic achievement and a symbol of the Germanic tribes' adaptability. The rise of the Franks and the conversion of Clovis to Christianity. Among all the Germanic tribes, the Franks emerged as perhaps the most enduring and transformative. Settling in what is now France and Western Germany, the Franks were initially a loose confederation of tribes. Under the leadership of Clovis in the late 5th century, they united into a powerful kingdom. Clovis was a shrewd and ambitious leader who expanded Frankish territory through relentless warfare, defeating rivals and consolidating power. His most significant act, however, was his conversion to Christianity around 496 AD. Unlike other Germanic kings who adopted Arian Christianity, Clovis converted to Catholic Christianity, aligning himself with the faith of the majority of his Roman subjects and the Roman Church. This decision gave the Franks a powerful ally in the papacy and distinguished them from other tribes. The baptism of Clovis and his warriors in Reims became a turning point in European history, laying the foundations for a Christian kingdom that would eventually evolve into modern France. The Franks' embrace of Catholicism also paved the way for closer ties between Germanic rulers and the Roman Church, a partnership that would define medieval Europe. With Clovis' victories and his embrace of faith, the Franks set themselves on a path to become the dominant power of Western Europe. Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire's role in shaping Europe. The legacy of the Germanic tribes reached its zenith with the reign of Charlemagne, the greatest of the Frankish kings. Ascending to power in 768, Charlemagne expanded his kingdom through a series of campaigns, conquering Lombards in Italy, Saxons in Germany, and extending his realm into Spain and Central Europe. His empire stretched across much of Western and Central Europe, uniting territories not seen since the Roman Empire. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned emperor by Pope Leo III in Rome, symbolically reviving the Western Roman Empire but under Germanic leadership. This act cemented the bond between the Church and the Frankish monarchy, shaping the identity of medieval Christendom. Charlemagne was not only a warrior but also a patron of learning and culture. He initiated what is called the Carolingian Renaissance, promoting education, preserving classical texts, and reforming administration and law. His reign brought a sense of unity to Europe, laying the foundations for the Holy Roman Empire. Though his empire fragmented after his death, the idea of a unified Christian Europe under Germanic kingship endured. Charlemagne's legacy was immense. He was remembered as both a conqueror and a builder, a figure who transformed the warrior traditions of the Germanic tribes into the cultural and political bedrock of medieval Europe. Germanic legal traditions, assemblies, and influence on medieval governance. One of the most enduring contributions of the Germanic tribes to Europe was their system of law and governance. Unlike the centralized Roman model, Germanic justice was rooted in tribal assemblies where free men gathered to deliberate, resolve disputes, and decide on matters of war and peace. Known in different regions as the Thing or Moot, these assemblies embodied a collective spirit, where decisions were not dictated solely by kings or chieftains but discussed among warriors and elders. Justice was based on restitution rather than imprisonment, with fines or compensations, known as wergild, literally, man price, assigned according to social rank and the nature of the crime. This system emphasized balance and restoration rather than the punitive severity common in Roman law. Over time, as Germanic kingdoms blended with Roman traditions, their laws were codified. The Visigothic Code and Salic law of the Franks stand out as influential examples, combining ancient tribal customs with written legal frameworks. These codes laid early foundations for European jurisprudence, influencing feudal law and even modern legal concepts of property, inheritance, and communal responsibility. The spirit of collective decision-making in assemblies also foreshadowed later parliaments and councils, ensuring that the Germanic approach to law and governance would shape Europe long after the tribes themselves disappeared as distinct entities. Germanic mythology, pagan beliefs, and transition to Christianity. The spiritual world of the Germanic tribes was rich, complex, and deeply tied to nature and warfare. They worshipped a pantheon of gods who represented strength, wisdom, fertility, and fate. Odin, the All-Father, was revered as a god of war and wisdom. Thor, the Thunderer, wielded his hammer to protect gods and men. And Tyr, the one-handed god, symbolized justice and sacrifice. Their mythology envisioned the cosmos as an eternal struggle, culminating in Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world where gods and giants would clash in ultimate destruction and renewal. Sacred groves and ritual sites dotted their homelands, where sacrifices, sometimes animals, sometimes human, were made to gain divine favor. Shamans and seers interpreted omens, guiding tribes in times of war. Yet, with the spread of Christianity through missionaries, conquest, and the conversion of kings, these ancient beliefs gradually gave way. Conversion was not always peaceful. The Saxons, for example, resisted for decades until Charlemagne's brutal campaigns forced them to adopt the new faith. Still, many pagan traditions were absorbed into Christian practices, blending old rituals with new meaning. The Germanic embrace of Christianity not only integrated them into wider European culture but also ensured their myths lived on in sagas, folklore, and legends that continue to inspire literature and art to this day. The legacy of Germanic languages, culture, and kingdoms across Europe. Beyond warfare and conquest, the Germanic legacy left an indelible mark on Europe's cultural and linguistic landscape. The Germanic language family gave rise to modern German, English, Dutch, and the Scandinavian languages, profoundly shaping Europe's communication and identity. Even in regions dominated by Romance languages, Germanic influence seeped in through borrowed words and cultural exchanges. The Anglo-Saxons in Britain, for instance, laid the foundation for English, which centuries later would become one of the world's dominant languages. Germanic cultural values also persisted. Their emphasis on kinship, loyalty, and warrior honor evolved into medieval chivalry and feudal bonds. Their legal traditions influenced governance, their folklore enriched literature, and their sense of communal assemblies contributed to political life. Kingdoms established by Germanic tribes became lasting states. The Visigoths in Spain, the Ostrogoths and Lombards in Italy, the Vandals in North Africa, and above all the Franks in France and Germany. Though many of these kingdoms eventually fell to new conquerors, their cultural imprints endured, woven into the broader European identity. Even today, festivals, sagas, and place names across Europe bear traces of Germanic roots. Their legacy was not one of destruction alone but of creation, an essential building block of Europe's languages, culture, and national traditions. The long-term impact of Germanic tribes on the fall of Rome and the birth of medieval Europe. The story of the Germanic tribes is inseparable from the story of Rome's fall and Europe's rebirth. For centuries, they were Rome's fiercest enemies and yet also its indispensable allies, shaping the empire's policies, military strategies, and borders. When Rome finally crumbled in the 5th century, it was not solely because of Germanic invasions but because of deeper internal weaknesses compounded by external pressures. Still, the Germanic tribes played a decisive role in dismantling the Western Empire and building something new in its place. They did not simply destroy, they inherited, adapted, and transformed. By blending their tribal traditions with Roman administration and Christian faith, they created the framework for medieval Europe. Their kingdoms became the seeds of modern nations, their laws informed European legal systems, their languages became mother tongues for millions, and their warrior spirit lived on in medieval knighthood. The legacy of figures like Arminius, Alaric, Theodoric, Clovis, and Charlemagne ensured that the Germanic past was remembered not as barbarism but as the forge of Europe's identity. The fierce warriors of the forests and plains became the founders of kingdoms, the protectors of faith, and the architects of a continent's destiny. Through struggle and adaptation, the Germanic tribes truly forged Europe.